And now I'm extremely honored to introduce our keynote speaker, a leader who personifies that Grady spirit, that intangible mix of leadership, drive, and personality, and who does so in ways that offer inspiration for us all. Our Convocation speaker today went from the halls of Grady College to the sets of Hollywood. Her IMDb page is the stuff of legend. How to Train Your Dragon, Toy Story, Dances with Wolves, Over the Hedge, The Addams Family, Disney's animated blockbuster Tarzan. Bonnie Arnold is a force in Hollywood. Such a force, in fact, that DreamWorks Animation named Arnold co-president and in 2016, president of feature animation. She's since returned to her beloved role as a producer of the upcoming How to Train Your Dragon 3 and of a new DWA animated film in development called Wizards of Once. She's twice been honored for her work by the college. In 1997, she was awarded the Henry W. Grady Award for Mid-Career Achievement. And last year, she won the John Holloman Jr. Lifetime Achievement Award and was inducted into the Grady Fellowship. For the past 2.5 years, Bonnie served as president, co-president of feature animation at DreamWorks Animation, as I said, overseeing an impressive slate that included such recent successes as Kung Fu Panda 3, Trolls, and The Boss Baby. Bonnie is a Golden Globe winner, an Academy Award nominee. The combined global revenue for her film producing efforts throughout her career reaches over $2.2 billion. In other words, students, she's kind of a big deal. And she's Grady, and we're awfully proud of it. Ladies and gentlemen, Bonnie Arnold.
Welcome, everyone, students, families, friends. Hey, gang. Can you all remember your first few months in Athens? I can. It was 1973. The first semester was tough. My biggest challenge was the fact that I would not turn 18 until December. 18 was the drinking age then, and I really felt left out. And that's the last thing you want to have happen when you're 17. The only thing that saved me that fall was the streaking fad. You know, everyone runs around campus naked. As a matter of fact, you guys may know this, it's like a flash mob, but nobody has any clothes on. I think somebody told me just recently, I think there were 4,000 people gathered naked in Reed Quadrangle. It was pretty amazing. Anyway, I discovered there was no minimum age to participate. But seriously, there's so much that's familiar, and there's a lot that's changed. Everyone's favorite bar, the B&L Warehouse, is now the police station. Go figure. So like it or not, things change, especially if you plan on working in the media or film industry. Today, I want to share with you some thoughts on how to actually make change work in your favor. With this in mind, let me take a quick poll of you graduates. Raise your hand if you feel pretty sure about how your next year is going to look. 5 years. 10 years. Okay. It seems most of you are understandably looking ahead with a sense of uncertainty. In fact, I read just the other day, between the ages of 20 and 30 is the most uncertain decade of your life. Anxiety-provoking maybe, but there's so many exciting possibilities. Your generation is very familiar with change. Since you were born, the ways we shop, communicate, travel, become informed, get entertainment have been transformed by companies like Amazon, Apple, Uber, Facebook, and Netflix. I suppose that when in a few years Elon Musk makes it possible for you to spend a weekend getaway on Mars, you'll be able to take that in your stride. But these are the kind of macro changes that affect the lives of millions of people. What about the smaller changes that are about to impact and shape your life and career? I stand before you as something of an expert on this subject. I've been dealing with it since my own graduation in 1977. So I want to share with you today 4 lessons I've learned from coping with all types of change that I hope will facilitate your journey. First of all, be flexible. In fact, if you only remember one thing I say today, this is the one to hold on to. My first job out of college was as a publicist on a film production called King of America. This took me to my first movie set. I walked into the production office, and any thoughts about what I might do went out the window. I knew this was where I wanted to be. But at that time, and outside of Hollywood, there was very little visibility into the pursuit of a career in film. There wasn't a film commission in every city or a film school in every state. I had no idea what my next step should be. But as luck would have it, Georgia had a small but thriving film business even then. One of my earliest production jobs was driving a big van, on a location scout. Not exactly what I had in mind when I got my degree. I'd be chauffeuring some important filmmakers from Hollywood who were looking at locations for a film called The Mosquito Coast. Not an easy assignment driving a bunch of guys around the North Georgia mountains for a week, but my passengers did include the film's producers, the director, and an actor named Harrison Ford. When I met them at the airport, the first thing one of them asked me was, "Are you sure you're old enough to drive?" I needed a boost just to get into the driver's seat. I recognized, though, that this was a unique opportunity, and I was flexible. So I did a good job, and by the time I dropped them off, they had offered me a job as the movie's production coordinator. They must have liked my driving. On a different occasion, I took another job that I had no training for, a bodyguard, for none other than the bodyguard himself, Kevin Costner. My assignment was to accompany him to the location in Mexico on a film we were working on together called Revenge. Little did I know I would have to fend off every fan between LA and Mexico City. But I delivered him without a hitch. And when the time came for him to put together a crew to work on his next film, his directorial debut, Dances with Wolves, he hired me to be the associate producer. This is why I urge you, as you start climbing your career ladder, to be flexible and take advantage of every opportunity. Who knew that the bodyguard job would lead to my first producing credit? As Kim Lubell, a former CEO, put it, focus on building a track record of success, and people will keep betting on you. Which brings me to my second lesson. As you grab those ladder rungs, there's a way to make the climb a little easier. Seek out a mentor. Think of a mentor as someone higher up the ladder who can help lift you up. But there's something even better than a mentor, and that's a sponsor. Mentors may open doors, but sponsors actually walk you through them. They may start out as your boss or supervisor. You work hard for them, you do your best, you make them look good, and they recognize that. They will make calls on your behalf. They will help you get interviews. They will go the extra mile so that you don't have to walk alone. Sometimes it takes someone else to see in us what we may not see in ourselves. They have faith in us, and once you have that faith, anything is possible. I was lucky enough to have 2 sponsors. The first was producer David Picker. He told me unequivocally that if I wanted to be a producer, I had to leave the safety of my home in Atlanta and move to Hollywood. Later, there was Jeffrey Katzenberg, first at Disney, then at DreamWorks. He kept pushing me to do more, which culminated in my stint as president of feature animation at DreamWorks. I'm so grateful to have had both Jeffrey and David. They taught me so much, and I have benefited over and over from their guidance. The third lesson for dealing with the challenges of change is be brave. The next seminal moment in my career brought me to the day when Peter Schneider, the head of animation at Disney, offered me a job on an animated movie called Simba. For those of you who know Disney trivia, Simba was the working title of a film called The Lion King. I thought about it, but I turned it down. I wasn't sure if I was being brave or foolish, but I told him my dream was to be the producer, and I was determined to hold out for the opportunity. 6 months after I said no to Simba, Peter Schneider called me back to say he wanted to introduce me to the director of a small film Disney was making with a new studio called Pixar. Yes, the film was Toy Story, the world's first computer animated feature. I had held on to my goal of being the producer, and now I had the chance. There's no way around it. It often takes courage to deal with change. After all, change takes place on many fronts. You might be doing something for the first time, and that means there's a chance you may not succeed. For Toy Story, I knew I'd be doing a lot of things for the first time, and this job was challenging from day one. It started the day I walked into my office. There was no typewriter. I panicked. How could I get any work done? The first thing I was going to have to learn about a movie made with computers was how to use one. Pixar had never made a feature film, and I was a filmmaker who had never used a computer. What a match. And that was just the beginning. Don't get me started on the intercom story. But the point is, the folks at Pixar were going to have to change their culture from more of a business to a production environment. I was the catalyst for that change. Sometimes change happens to us, but other times you may have to take the lead. Computer-generated animation was incredibly primitive. We had both technological and financial constraints. Remember, this was a time when the very biggest hard drives were all of 1 gigabyte. It took hours to render just a few frames of a scene, and it was very expensive. Another problem to solve was the editing, a process that had been tried and true for 100 years. You know, 35 millimeter film and a moviola. We were creating digital images, and digital editing made sense, but did everything have to be reinvented? The equipment they wanted to use was a machine called the Avid. It had never been used on a feature film before, and very few editors knew how to use it. I guess change was inevitable in filmmaking, and it all seemed like it was happening on this movie. We had creative challenges too. There was a big issue in the early recordings of Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. Believe it or not, Tom and Tim sounded a lot alike. In our story reels, which contained a lot of pencil drawings, you couldn't tell who was speaking. What's more, Woody just wasn't sympathetic. The audience needed to empathize with his insecurity about being replaced by Buzz, whose personality wasn't distinct either. It took a huge amount of trial and error to discover Buzz's character as a comically overconfident space ranger who was in denial about being a toy. But slowly, when we found our way to show these character traits through the writing and the performance, Buzz and Woody stopped sounding alike. Throughout all of this, there were many instances of great anxiety and uncertainty. There were days when I thought that it wasn't going to work, but we were all excited by the challenge of breaking new ground. I worked with a courageous team of dynamic, creative, devoted people. We tackled the challenges one at a time. The result was, by any measure, a landmark motion picture, and there was no way it could have happened without all of us having to bravely confront many moments of real fear. This is a reminder that the things that we are most afraid of almost never happen. I was afraid Toy Story might never make it to the screen, but it turned out just the opposite. And what I think was by far the bravest thing I did was give birth to my daughter Lily right in the middle of it all. Certainly the best thing I ever produced, and it changed my life for the better. As I've learned over the years, when dealing with fear, you really have only two options: give in or persevere, which really means you only have one option: persevere, which is actually the fourth lesson. The quicker you realize this, the better. I've been there. It's been 4 decades since I sat where you're sitting. I've climbed quite a few rungs of the ladder that's in front of you, and you know what? Change still isn't easy, but through all the challenges, I've learned to persevere. For example, I'm very proud of the films I've been working on for the last 10 years. How to Train Your Dragon 1, 2, and soon 3. But each of them had creative challenges as tough as Toy Story. The first Dragon film started off as a straight adaptation of a children's book, which was a story about two runts, Hiccup, who was the runt of his village, and Toothless, who was the runt of the dragons. After many months of work, we realized this story wasn't the movie we wanted to make. This led us to the right story, that Hiccup would be the first dragon to befriend his dragon enemy, the first Viking to befriend his dragon enemy, and that Toothless would be the most fearsome dragon of all. It seems obvious now, but it took years to figure out the best hook for the narrative. And now I'm doing it all over again, producing a new film for DreamWorks called The Wizards of Once, and as always, there have been some challenges. A little over a year ago, the studio was acquired by Comcast, which brought a lot of change and some uncertainty too. We went from being small and independent to being part of a large corporation, which meant new faces, new ways of doing things, but oh so many possibilities. In fact, every time I deal with the challenges of change and uncertainty, I find it a little less difficult. It never gets easy, but I assure you it also never gets boring. I love that I have a job where I don't have to do the same thing every day. There's always the sudden surprises and revelations, and once again, I remind myself of lesson 1, be flexible. As for lesson 2, find a mentor. These days, I'm the one who's being a mentor and a sponsor, something I find very gratifying. And every day, I'm very mindful of lessons 3 and 4 as I go out there and try to be fearless and persevere. And to quote J. Paul Getty, without the element of uncertainty, even the greatest triumph would be dull, routine, and eminently unsatisfying. So congratulations, take pride in all you've accomplished. Enjoy today, and tomorrow go out there and let change happen. Thank you very much, and go Dogs.